Coming up in today's edition of Locked On Eagles, we recap the press conference of General Manager Howie Roseman. He had a lot to say Tuesday in Indianapolis during the NFL Scouting Combine.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to a Wednesday edition of the show. I'm Louis DiBiase alongside Gino Camilleri. We're your only daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, even throughout the offseason, posting Monday through Friday, as always, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Gino, today we're going to dive into a lot of the comments from Howie Roseman yesterday, the Eagles general manager. He talked with the media during a press conference in Indianapolis for the NFL Scouting Combine, which workouts get underway. And we have a weekend full of draft content. So our draft rats out there that love the draft 24/7, this is definitely a week for you. And Howie talked a lot about the draft process, Gino, the free agents that are going to be available that he needs to re-sign for the Eagles, and the balance he needs to strike also, though, with the draft picks he has and paying Jalen Hurts. He really did talk about a lot. He's always an interesting listen. Even in years where I'm not a Howie guy, I think he always, every time I listen to him, I learn something, and he really gets my mind thinking about philosophy of roster construction and things like that.
Does it not sound like he has a newfound confidence to him in the last couple years?
It's funny you mentioned that. I think he has a newfound, I don't know if it's a humbleness, but he's less, I don't know if it's braggadocious, but I think he's learned from, maybe it was 2020, but he just feels more reserved and he's doing more of the talking through his actions. Like even with the Jalen Hurts talk, for what Jalen did this year, Howie is not very hyped up, if you know what I mean. Like he doesn't hype Jalen up the same way he hyped up, let's say, Carson Wentz, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I just think that's the Eagles now. That's how Hurts is wired and this entire team. I think it's actually a good thing.
I think he's playing it close to the chest, which in the past,
everything
like you had
is
said,
close to the chest. Yeah,
it kind of got him in trouble a couple times. The Carson Wentz is a finger attached to our
the quarterback
hand type of
factory.
thing.
I mean,
yeah,
how many
exactly.
quotes? Yeah,
exactly. Nick Sirianni's still good for those quotes every now and then.
Right,
He had a couple good ones yesterday, but Howie seems to know that he has a plan, and he is sticking to the plan. And his plan this time around, Lou, is to not go outside of what they have put in place to pay these free agents, because they know after this season, when that Jalen Hurts contract does kick in, which he said yesterday, he hopes it's a win-win for both sides. And I could see them backloading it, like you've said, for most of the time, and then they can restructure it a couple years down the road. That's something they could absolutely do, but they can't go over what they're willing to spend at positions like running back, let's say.
Yeah.
Like Isaac Seumalo, I'm sure they're having a realistic conversation saying there's no way we can pay you. And they're going to try and find another option. And they have to continue to be proactive, which he made mention of not yesterday, but today with Peter Schrager. He had another media outing, and he wants to keep ahead of the curve. And I think that was evident last year, Lou, where you make those selections in Jordan Davis, where it's almost a redshirt year, and Nakobe Dean, he only plays special teams for you and should have a bigger role coming in. And Cam Jurgens, those are 3 proactive picks. So that seems to be the sentiment moving forward. And now we just have to identify where are the areas that they can be proactive. And I think there are a couple of them that stick out. Cornerback, potentially tackle for how much this team loves that position, and definitely interior defensive line, which is going to have a lot of overhaul going into next year.
Yeah, Gino, I think you talk about, I mean, Roseman said specifically, you want to zag a lot of times when the NFL is zigging, or zigging when the NFL is zagging, and stay ahead of the curve. If you're being a copycat, normally you're not going to have an edge in such a close league already. And I really like that he mentioned that, because I think that's a highlight of what Howie does really well. If you look at 2017, how he built that Super Bowl contender, just look at the creativity he had in moving up for Carson Wentz, right? Trading up 2 times to go get this player in a class that I think people liked but weren't all in on, like, 2023 is. So he took advantage of that market, and he also traded a lot of draft picks that year, in a year where, Gino, me and you both said he kind of started the trade era. It wasn't the Rams. I think it was the 2017 Eagles. They were dealing a lot of draft picks that year to go get proven veterans. Like, you look at Timmy Jernigan and Ronald Darby, and you look at Jay Ajayi during the season. Then in 2022, he kind of took a different approach. Like, okay, now Rams culture is kind of across the NFL. I'm going to collect a lot of picks now because teams are more willing to spend and give up picks. So then that allows me to be aggressive in my own way and have long-term flexibility. So I think Roseman saying that he's always trying to stay ahead of the curve is super important. And I think that's been a huge reason that the Eagles have made a Super Bowl twice in the last 6 seasons, and they won one.
And I think the final movement to the proactivity, which Howie Roseman is speaking, is this offseason. Because when you look at next year, Lou, they have 12 draft picks, right? Mm-hmm. This is the final window where they can capitalize on Jalen Hurts. So you have to continue with that mindset where, yes, we can be reactive and play for this year. They're still going to have a great base of guys to move forward with and compete for another Super Bowl, in my opinion. Right. Who in the NFC is going to continue to get as good as them? In my opinion, nobody right now. And the thing is, if you make those right selections, in a couple of years from now, we won't be in that 2018, 2019, 2020 mindset where Jalen Reagor was the ultimate epitome of a reactionary pick. Keep continuing to draft the best player available. Continue to invest in positions where, yes, you have a need now, but at the same time, it's a need moving forward.
Right. And Gino, going young, by the way, doesn't mean you're sacrificing the short term. I mean,
no, look at Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. They gave up
look at all the young pieces.
I count him in this class for sure.
Exactly. And you look at a lot of the free agents that the Eagles are likely to re-sign this year. It's not like 2018 where they're going to, restructure an older, injured Alshon Jeffrey's contract. Like, yeah, you got to be disciplined when it comes to what you're going to do with Javon Hargrave, and you got to be disciplined when it comes to Miles Sanders because of his position. But at the same time, a lot of these guys that he likely will pay are young. So I think at the same time, he has to just find the balance. And I think he's doing a better job of it now of, yes, you want to stay ahead of the curve, but at the same time, I think sometimes from 2018 to 2020, Howie tried that a little bit too much with the Reagor pick, for instance, where he was always trying to be the smartest guy in the room. And what's also helped the Eagles bounce back is Roseman is better now at just doing the simple things. Like when it comes to the draft, why has he been so much better at drafting the last 2 years? It's not a coincidence. He's just taking solid college football players from big schools. So it's striking that balance of, yes, staying ahead of the curve, but also having your core philosophies like, the trenches and quarterback's important and, those main staples of what we know works in the NFL. And I think that's the theme of the NFL right now is that balance is everything. And I think Howie is doing a tremendous job of striking that with the roster, with the age of the roster, with draft picks versus free agents, pretty much everything.
And he's had to learn the hard way. This has been a process that's been going on for a decade plus, and he has learned from the wrongs that he has done. He hasn't always been
not a lot of GMs get to learn this much, Gino.
No, absolutely. And he's at a spot in his career, Lou, where you hear him talk, and it really just seems that he is going about this with everybody in that building. They're all in, and it seems the cohesiveness is as good as ever between the coaching staff, what the general manager is willing and able to do. And in terms of philosophy, Howie Roseman has found guys for this offense, for this defense, and moving forward for Desai, we should see some moves on the defensive side of the ball that will probably indicate where we can upgrade and where it might be different from Jonathan Gannon. But Howie Roseman hasn't made those selections where you're saying, I don't see this guy fitting for the Eagles. Like Nakobe Dean, in the third round, it's a no-brainer. The guy's going to come in right away, produce on special teams. He was a high-quality player at Georgia at a position that you have a huge need at going into 2023. And same thing with Jordan Davis. Could you have made an argument that you could have went and got a player that was better suited to help you win at that exact moment in time? I agree. But you go out and you draft the unicorn that runs a 4.68 at 360 pounds. Somebody that is as decorated as Jordan Davis and is a true force multiplier. I'll say one thing when it comes to Howie Roseman. He is going to keep his cards close to the chest, Lou. And the thing is, you should know what Howie Roseman has in his hand because he hasn't deviated from his plan too much. He's just done a better job and making the right hits and not missing as much as he has in the past.
He's super interesting to listen to, had some really good stuff. Definitely recommend not just checking out the press conference, but his interview with Peter Schrager. He's also going to be
on Kelsey's.
He's going to be on New Heights with Howie and Travis. So that's going to be awesome too, for sure, to check out that podcast. We got more Howie Roseman talk actually, though, coming up next, because Gino in his press conference, he mentioned some stuff about this quarterback class that got me thinking about what he could try to do like he's done in the past few off seasons. So we'll get into that coming up next, right here in this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles. And guys, today it's sponsored by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because new customers, they get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained, who you think is going to come out of this cluster that is the Western Conference in the NBA, the East as well. Are you buying the Sixers? I'm not. I don't think they can beat Boston and Milwaukee, but regardless, you can bet on it all at FanDuel. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA, the NFL, and now the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, Eagles fans, we are continuing on this Wednesday edition of the show. I'm Louis DiBiase alongside my co-host Gino Camilleri. It's How We Talk. And Gino, we talk a lot about Howie because I just think Howie Roseman represents a lot of the roster construction conversations we like to have, and the philosophical debates and draft talk, free agency. I mean, he runs the entire team, and I think it's the most interesting part of this organization. Of course, we love the X's and O's and the coaching and player development and talk, but this is really the stuff I enjoy the most. And I thought listening to him talk on Tuesday was really interesting. He mentioned something about his quarterback class. Mike Kay, formerly an Eagles beat reporter who's now with the Carolina Panthers, asked Howie the first question about what he thinks about this quarterback class. And Roseman talked about how obviously the Eagles aren't in a market for that player, but he said it's a really talented class. He expects a lot of competition in that top 10 to get these four guys, and he thinks they're all worth going. And last year, he didn't say that same thing about the quarterbacks like Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett. I wonder if he's going to try to do what he's done the last 2 years, which is take that Carson Wentz trade, the draft flexibility he should have only had for 1 year, and continue to stretch it maybe now into 3 years where they have multiple first-round picks. Like in 2024, I could see Howie saying one of these quarterbacks slipped. Hey, Washington. Hey, Minnesota, Tennessee. You guys, New York. You guys want to come up? New Orleans, you want to give us your first again next year? I could see it happening. I don't know if a quarterback would fall where a team could move up, but Gino, I think this is a strategy Roseman likes to consider every single year because it allows him to have his cake and eat it too.
Well, let's just go through the list. So
yeah.
Chicago, I think they sit with Justin Fields.
Yes.
Houston absolutely could take one. Arizona, I don't think they're going to move past Kyler. We know that. Indianapolis absolutely could take one. Could Seattle? I think they move forward with Geno
Pete Carroll was talking, though. It sounds like even if they pay Geno, they're open-minded to it.
That's another one. So you got Seattle. I don't think the Lions are going to. I think they go with Goff.
I think they should.
Las Vegas, Atlanta, Carolina. Yeah. Behind the Eagles is Tennessee, Houston again. Let's say they don't get their guy. They want to go defense. Something crazy could happen with Houston. Yeah. We know them. Then you got Washington. Then you have Tampa. Then you have Seattle again.
Tampa. That's right. Yeah.
You have all of these teams that are sitting there wanting four different guys. I'm sure the Aaron Rodgers news, and I'm sure maybe a Zach Wilson trade and other things will change the landscape here. And we know free agency
which could help
will
the Eagles
because well.
If some of those teams like the Raiders or Panthers or Falcons go after those veterans, it could help push one of those guys down, which could help you move out and collect a first.
Well, if you're talking about 8 teams in the top 20 that could potentially want to get up into the top 10, Lou, that's a situation where I look back when Patrick Mahomes was taken by the not by the Buffalo Bills, by Kansas City, who traded up to get that Bills pick from the mid 20s or so. I mean, even if you move back to, let's say 21, for example, let's throw out a hypothetical. You're moving back 11 spots. You're going to recoup another first round pick if you move back that far. If it's for a quarterback, you 100% are going to get more than just a first round pick. And you are still going to be in a position where you have more assets that if you wanted to move back into that middle teens, you absolutely could.
Yeah.
I don't think they walk out of this draft with any less than 8 picks, Lou. I think they find a way to get those 6, trade back with one of those first, maybe that second, and ultimately get 7 or 8. Maybe they trade a Quez, for example. Maybe they trade a back-end defensive lineman, but they have to collect more picks. And what a draft where anybody could fall in love with any of these 4 quarterbacks. It's not a consensus number 1. It's not a Joe Burrow's going to go, then Tua, then Justin,
Right.
and we'll find out where Mac Jones go. You could genuinely make the case that any of these teams are going to fall in love with any one of these guys and make them their top priority.
And Gino, I like the corners. I like the defensive linemen, the offensive linemen that are available late in this first round. That if you go hypothetically, as you mentioned, to 21 and you're picking 21 and 30, and you can collect a 1 in 2024. So then next year you have 2 1s and 2 2s. I'm all in on that. Again, another example of why Jalen Hurts panning out helps you so much, because not only could you take a top 10 player because you have a quarterback, so you can take one at a different position, but you also, this could then open up the possibility of moving down and collecting another 1. So I don't know if it's going to happen. I think he's going to try. I think at the same time, Gino, you mentioned a lot of those teams that are already inside the top 10 that are likely going to take quarterbacks. But even if that happens, and let's say the Eagles can't move down from 10 because all 4 of those guys are off the board, that's going to push down a lot of prospects that in the past few years with weaker quarterback classes weren't available. So the last 2 years, the Eagles have struck out when it comes to getting those top corners like J.C. Horn, Patrick Surtain, Sauce Gardner, Derek Stingley. Now this year at 10, you're probably going to have a chance to take Devin Witherspoon, Christian Gonzalez, pretty much whoever you want. So even if you can't trade down because quarterbacks go early, as Howie said, that's going to help them.
This is that draft that we've been waiting for where you're in a position. So let's go back to the Andre Dillard draft where we're saying if you could get one of those defensive linemen, you'll be in for a great pick.
And none of them fell.
None of them fell because you were at 20.
Because it was just Kyler Murray went, and that was in Daniel Jones. That's it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So in this, you have a perfect mix of being at 10, of so many teams needing this is an outlier amount of teams that need quarterbacks. The carousel is going to truly be I mean, Lou, at this point, would Gardner Minshew competing for a starting job somewhere shock you at this point?
I tweeted out the other day, I think he's the Cardinals starter with Jonathan Gannon until Kyler comes back.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. What a take. I don't hate that at all. And hey, looking to next year, Lou, with all these comp picks that you're going to get, even if you walk away with 6 this year, 3 of them are quality. 3 of them are 2 firsts and a second, and you have your 3rd round pick. Even if you have a class that isn't great on the back end, you hope you get 3 to 4 starters out of this class to where next year, we could go quantity and just bring in bodies to try and replace those guys. Yeah. But you still have to be proactive. Like, let's say, for example, in Mel Kiper's latest draft, the Eagles are at 10, and Peter Skronsky, the offensive tackle out of Northwestern, is there.
Sure.
Would you bat an eye if Howie Roseman
No,
made
not
that
at
pick?
all, Gino. And again, I don't think Lane Johnson's going to retire next year or the year after, but I could see a Cam Jurgens-like approach where it's, hey, let's take this tackle. He's our perfect backup for Mailata and Lane Johnson. And then when Lane hangs it up, which is going to eventually, boom, seamless transition. That's the awesome thing, Gino, is like we've already talked, and it's March 1st now. We've mentioned trade down scenarios, trade up scenarios, so many different positions you can think of. The Eagles have so much optionality, and I love that, and it's part of why I could see Howie trying to continue that with the way he's been getting that optionality with this strategy of let's take advantage of teams wanting to move up. And the crazy part is he's done it twice already, and those teams didn't even want quarterbacks. They wanted receivers.
If you could go back in time to 2018, Lou.
Yeah.
When the New Orleans Saints traded up and they selected Marcus Davenport, how much does things change if Lamar Jackson is the pick and the Eagles don't have somebody to trade with that pick at the end? That's a butterfly effect that I don't think we get talked about enough. And I have some homework for you after this. I want you to make the Carson Wentz trade tree where it all began. Okay. Carson Wentz the picks, and we'll just continue to run this thing out because Howie Roseman said a couple years ago, Lou, optionality. That word you keep going back to. Howie Roseman is never going to be boxed into a corner. He's never going to make that Danny Watkins selection ever again. That type of pick will not be made. They're going to be proactive, and they're going to take the best player available. Those are the 2 things you can guarantee for Howie Roseman in the draft.
We got free agency first, though, Gino, coming up in just a few weeks. So I want to talk about free agents that are not on the Eagles. We talked a lot about taking care of the in-house moves that they have to. There's a lot of them, but I've had a lot of questions on Twitter about guys we'd want for the Eagles on other teams, because it's not like they're not going to sign anybody else. So we'll get into that coming up next right here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles. All right, Eagles fans, we're wrapping up this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles. Louis DiBiase alongside Gino Camilleri. Gino, we're talking a lot about the draft today. Of course, the scouting combine is this week, so we're going to have a lot of draft takes. And, that's just what we do right here on LOE for sure up until April. But, of course, free agency coming up soon. Howie Roseman getting grilled about all the decisions he's got to make about Javon Hargrave, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who, by the way, I can't believe we didn't even mention this yet, Gino. Love that he called out Jonathan Gannon today and said that he did not put his players in a position to succeed in the Super Bowl. And anybody that's saying CGJ was out of line for that tweet, his defensive coordinator cost this team a championship. I'm all in on. And Gannon, to me, did not take enough accountability. I love that Gardner-Johnson said that. Even though he deleted it, I'm team CGJ on that one.
Yeah, somebody from WIP tried to tell me, didn't Jonathan Gannon take accountability?
All he said is that's on me and kept saying I'm not going to answer any more questions.
He said he answered, Lou, verbatim, I've answered 2 questions on that. I'm moving on.
And he didn't
That's
say
not
anything
accountability.
Yeah.
That's not holding yourself accountable.
And he doesn't have to be accountable now because he's got a head coaching job. If I was CGJ, I'd be pissed off too.
Yeah, the guy that was with you till the end, all of a sudden, he's not going to own up to what he did, and he's going to go out there, leave town. Yeah. I think CGJ has all the right. That's a Philly move through and through. Tell me people in Philadelphia aren't happy that he was saying that. It's
Give
everybody outside
contract.
they're going to extend him, Lou. And I think, one, I don't care who you sign outside of Philadelphia. If Chauncey Gardner-Johnson isn't an Eagle for a long-term future, I think you're going to be in a bad position. Yeah. But this is a class, Lou, and looking at Sean Desai, I think there's a name that pops out for me. Yeah. That if you look at what the defensive coordinators that have come into Philly have done is they brought in 1 or 2 guys along the way. Jim Schwartz with Zach Brown. You look at Anthony Harris with Jonathan Gannon.
Oh, good point.
I love the name Poona Ford coming to Philadelphia. You could potentially have to replace 4 interior defensive linemen. I think the realistic number will probably be 2, maybe even 3 if you invest all that money in Javon.
Hargrave,
Yeah, Poona Ford. He's a guy who played for Sean Desai for multiple years in that Seattle system. He could come here and fill a need for you right away, and he isn't going to be a guy that's going to command even as much money as Fletcher Cox, in my opinion. I still think Fletcher might be priced out, and I had this discussion today, Lou, on Philly Sports Table with Jeff Warren.
Yeah.
If you had to invest, let's say $10 million in Cox, but Hargrave is going to cost you 14 to 16, do you make the tough decision and let Cox walk so you can have that money to invest in Hargrave?
Oh, easily.
Because he's still young enough and he's still playing at a good enough level to where I want him back. I
still think I can get 3
player.
Great years from Hargrave.
100%.
If it's a $4 to $5 million difference with, like, if Cox is significantly cheaper, Gino, then I'm okay with letting Hargrave go, bringing in Cox, bringing in Poona Ford, or drafting somebody else, letting Milton Williams and Jordan Davis emerge for sure. But if it's that close, and we've had that conversation for an entire year now, especially with the season Hargrave had, I'm in on that. So Poona Ford's a super interesting player to target. I didn't even really think of him. So that's a good one for sure. And that's what the segment was going to be about, is just looking at some outside free agents that the Eagles could bring in, because they're not going to be able to keep everybody from in-house, and they're not going to be able to replace everybody through the draft. So you mentioned Poona Ford. I think, Gino, you look at the offensive side of the football, we've had a lot of Quez Watkins discussions over these past 2 weeks. I think you look at a guy like Mecole Hardman, who has a similar niche role where he's explosive. I know, that's your guy. He's explosive. He can play inside. He's a good returner, which the Eagles need desperate help in that area. I don't know if he would even cost that much. I feel like Mecole Hardman could be what I wanted Quez Watkins to be last year. He's a player that I would love. The receiver market's pretty thin this year in free agency, so he might be overpriced. But, man, talk about a guy that I think got away in 2019, and I would love to have him come to Philadelphia.
It's going to be interesting to see what he commands, because this
might be more than, and look at Christian Kirk last year. We never thought he'd get that kind of deal, but
hey, I know you mentioned this name as well. Paris Campbell makes a boatload of sense. Let's say
Robert Woods just got released too. The Eagles had some interest in him last year.
You look at Pascal though, you can bring him in and use his athleticism in the return game if you want to. And Nick Sirianni, ding, ding, ding. You talk about familiarity with wide receivers. He was integral in that class, getting Paris Campbell there. And that makes a boatload of sense to me. I do think that if you're going to pick one of the offensive positions to bring in a free agent, Lou, I think tight end is one that you probably want to look to upgrade. I know Jack Stoll improved, and I know Calcaterra has some things to work
They're
with.
not good enough for 12 personnel, though, Gino.
No, they're not. No, and one guy I mentioned Tommy Sweeney a little bit ago. Look at a guy like Irv Smith Jr. for the Vikings right now, an unrestricted free agent. Let's say he doesn't live up to his potential in Minnesota, comes here, wants to be a number 2, almost like a OJ Howard type of player, and mention OJ Howard. I think that would be another great name as well. And just somebody that can bring more to the receiving game when it comes to 12 personnel to open up more things for Dallas.
Exactly.
Goddard.
I think the Eagles ran 11 personnel last year more than maybe any team. And so that's why that wide receiver 3 spot, sure, is it as important since you have Smith, Brown, and Goddard? No. But when you run 11 personnel that much, it's important. And so is the backup tight end spot, because if Quez Watkins doesn't take that step this year, if you can't get a Mecole Hardman or somebody like that, you're going to need that second tight end to step up more. So I think those 2 spots are definitely ones to focus on. And then, Gino, I mentioned Gardner Minshew. I think is going to be gone. I think he would make so much sense in Arizona. Marcus Mariota just got released from the Arizona Cardinals. He's a mobile quarterback. You wouldn't have to change the offense a lot if Jalen Hurts went down. Fulfill the 2015 prophecy. I want to see Marcus Mariota. Maybe it's just the kid in me more that wants to see this, but give me Mariota and Midnight Green as the backup quarterback.
I wouldn't mind wanting to see Jacoby Brissett. Like, if you could get him in there on it, it would probably be more money than you're willing to pay. I think teams could still see him as a high.
I'm with you, though. I like Brissett. Teddy Bridgewater's a free agent, too.
You're
not a Teddy guy?
I used to be. I used to be a big time Teddy guy.
I think as a backup, I would take him, but I think Mariota's better because, look at how different
not
the
Andy Dalton.
Looked.
I mean, no way. Not Tyler Heineke.
No.
Lamar Jackson's a free agent, too.
I think you're holding out for Jake Haener.
I ultimately think at quarterback, you're going to have to find somebody that is a veteran, though. You can't just bring a rookie in there to back up. I mean, Ian Book is your second best option. No way.
Not
what
with
about
how
running back,
important it's
been.
What
about running back?
Yeah.
I might dip into this market because there are a ton of names that you can go and just say, hey, come here for the vet minimum. We'll see how it works. Like Matt Breida from the Bills. I mean, put in some good positions last year for Buffalo. Can you bring him in for cheap if they want to keep Devin Singletary? Who knows the market on a guy like, let's say, Darrell Williams, Dontrell Hilliard? I mean, there's guys, there's names. That's the thing. There's guys that can play 5 to 10 snaps, and that's all you really need to get in this free agency pool out of that wide receiver market, because you're either one, going to trust Kenny Gainwell, and if you don't sign a veteran running back, you're probably going to take one in the draft at some point.
It's going to be interesting. And again, free agency this year, I don't think is as important when it comes to, players from other teams. But again, as we mentioned, you can't keep everybody in-house. You can't draft all of your replacements. So it's still going to have a role. And so those are players definitely to keep an eye on, as free agency is just around the corner. In a few weeks, we got you covered right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast for all your free agency and draft content as the combine continues to roll on this week. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Eagles on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. And we're always talking birds throughout the day on Twitter at Locked On Birds, at DiBiase, LOE, and at GC24_football. Thanks for making Locked On Eagles your first listen every day. Make sure your second listen is the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast. Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez provide in-depth coverage of the biggest NFL draft prospects with deep dives into the sleepers and hidden gems that can change your favorite NFL franchise. You can find Locked On NFL Draft wherever you get Locked On Eagles. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. As always, thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening. And let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.